are. Another day, another chess. Let's see what we got. Okay. Morning game storming. Yeah, so today I'm going to do the post-mortem. That means I'll look at a couple of your games. If you've got a game you'd like me to look at, send it over. Yeah, I'm in France for the year. So this is just the beginning. Sure. Understood. Have a good day at work. I hope your work is satisfying. Sure, Great Wolf. Oh, wow. No rush, Great Wolf. I'm just chilling here until someone gives me something they want me to look at for them. Hey Das, how are you doing? I'll check over on Discord. Make sure there's no missing games or messages there. so Moobot's not letting you send links. Yeah. So what you're gonna have to do is, I'm sending you a whisper. You could send it back in the whisper, for example. It's not a mod, it's a Moobot doing things. There's no moderators. There's no moderators. It's just Twitch versus us. Okay. I got one here from Great Wolf. And this is a puzzle, Great Wolf. So we just need this position, not the moves that lead to it, or is that right? And I've got one from DOS. And the one from DOS looks like a full chess game. Yeah. Hey, Scotty. All right, so for Great Wolf, I just need to grab this position. We'll use that as like a warm-up, since Great Wolf's sending us kind of a puzzle, I think. That'll be our warm-up, so that we're calculating a little bit. It's always good to be calculating a little bit if you're going to do some chess. And then we'll look at DOS Debug's Berlin defense. Yeah. All right, so let's see if I can grab this position. Looks like no. So I'll do it manually. White's position doesn't look very well developed, does it? Oh my goodness, it's even worse. Look how many pieces Black has out. Oh my god. Oh my god. Do I have this right? Looks like Black's moved 7 times more than White in a 15-move game. Wow. All right. So here we are. Okay, DOS Debug's also got a warm-up puzzle for us. And by the way, Scotty, the answer to the question, how am I, is I'm online. Yes. Oh, yes. There's H6 already played? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. All right, let's load this position. Wait. Shoot. Okay, it should be Black to play, folks. All right, now it's Black to play. Okay, good. All right, I had a moment of being soft and I flipped the side of the board for you all. We'll give Black's name Black to play, and White will also be Black to play. Now we know whose move it is. Yeah, I should not keep you from sleeping. Sleep is very important. But this is when I will generally be streaming. Not tomorrow because there's no school on Wednesdays in France. to play. Okay, nice confusing position. Thanks, Great Wolf. This is a really good position for us to all muddle through. Well, engine evaluations have gotten weird, Great Wolf, so we'll see if you're right or wrong, okay? Engines have started looking so far ahead that their evaluations don't match at all a human way of evaluating. So I may say that your evaluation is actually more useful for a human. We'll see. We'll see when we get there. For now, DOS-Debug has identified that Black has a nice lead in development, which should give them the advantage. They have sacrificed one pawn, but I agree the development advantage is just too much. So yeah, let's all calculate for a couple minutes. See if we can come up with one or two critical lines. So DOS, you just have to try and calculate a bunch of variations for yourself for a couple minutes, okay? Just move, you know, calculating variations, no general thoughts, and just see what you can come up with for a couple minutes by yourself. Other people will do the same, and then we will, you know, check together on what we've seen or not seen. Tough puzzle. Tough puzzle. I mean, I'm not sure that I figured it out. Morning, Goko fan. All right, but we've probably spent enough time on it, so let's check what we've got. I'm gonna check what DOS-Debug said here in chat. Anyone else who wants to share in chat what they think the best line would be for Black, go for it. DOS-Debug says knight e4, rook e4, bishop d5, rook e1, e4, and Black should be good. All right, so DOS-Debug is opening up the rooks, looking at the queen, and using the development lead a little bit. But in this position, DOS-Debug, you're missing a better option than bishop d5 in this variation. There you go. All right. So f5 would win a piece for Black in this line. So as Pooh Bear is saying, the critical move is if you go knight e4, bishop takes e6. That's critical. Now, in this position, what is black supposed to do? Hey, Dai. How are you? Yeah, I'm good. I moved for a year with the family to France a month ago. So, yeah, in a new place. Lots of adventures. Yeah. Right. So we're just solving a warm-up puzzle, folks, and then we're going to be looking at viewer games. So the warm-up puzzle, this is black to play. We're one move into the variation. I think that originally DOS had suggested rook takes e6 here would be good enough. Right? But in fact, there's a critical move, knight takes f2, that Great Wolf mentioned looking at. And this is where I spent most of my time as well, was knight takes f2. Thanks, B8. Yeah, the idea here is that if we attack the queen, and if white takes it, we take here, and black has won a pawn in the exchange. We can go back through it so you can count and see. One piece each. Sorry, one piece, one pawn, two pieces, and two pieces. And black's captured one more pawn than white in that exchange. Now, this position here, Great Wolf evaluated as +1 from black side, and the computer evaluated it as +4. That is a really useless evaluation from the computer for a human Great Wolf. There's no way anyone would look at this position and think that they're ahead by more than a piece as black. Materials equal. Black started out down a pawn, so you've recovered the gambit pawn, and you have an advantage now because the white king position's a bit weak, and you know, white still has a little work to do on their development. But there's no way it would make sense for any humans to call this +4. So it was as I suspected. Your evaluation is correct from the sense of every way that humans have ever played chess in the past. The computer's +4 is based on it's looking another 10, 20 moves ahead that you have no way of looking at. There's nothing particularly deadly about this position. It's white's move. It's not even black's move. I mean, if it were black's move, could you play e4? Sure. Wouldn't be a bad move. But, you know, it's white's move, so there's still some work to be done here. I think that Great Wolf, your evaluation of +1 is very reasonable for a human playing this position. It's an optimistic evaluation with equal material, but it suggests that you think black has a sizable advantage here despite the equal material, which seems right to me. So that's totally cool. The other critical variation that I spent a lot of time on was bishop f7 check. Now here I thought black would take with the queen. And then after queen e2, the knight seems to be trapped, right? So from here it's tricky. If you go bishop c5, white has bishop e3, and if you go rook f8, white has rook f1. Right? So it's not obvious how we extract a huge advantage, but ultimately what I decided was that the most we could do with the knight is get one of the kingside pawns to weaken white's king position a bit more. So like here, here, and here. And right now, material is equal. So we tried to win a pawn with knight takes f2, but white, that's a desperado, right? Knight takes f2. We're getting one pawn out of this knight before we recapture the piece. But the opponent then also, oh wait, gotta turn this. Okay, but then the opponent also desperados for a pawn. Oh, sorry. With this move. So far the pawns are equal, but now we're up a knight. And while white is winning back the knight, we get one pawn for it when we desperado it anyway. So at the end, black has won a pawn. We started out down a pawn. So we win back our pawn. And that means material is now equal. And we're basically playing off of a positional advantage. The positional advantage here is that the white king is weak. If you look at our pawn structure, black's pawn structure is actually much worse in the endgame, with a bunch of isolated pawns. So the positional advantage, so to speak, is white's king safety. That's black's positional advantage. And you know, the king comes here. You have to play very, very precisely and accurately here to get an advantage for black. Maybe with rook f8, maybe you have to play e4 first. Because rook f8, queen g2, I'm not sure what a strong move would be for black there. So maybe we have to try e4 first. And then against queen g2, it's still not obvious what we do, right? So so this is a tricky position. Black probably has the advantage, but even here, I mean, it's hard to figure out and calculate exactly what you need to do in this position. I mean, I think even choosing between e4, rook f8, and a third move I haven't thought of is not obvious at all. So does black have an advantage here? I would guess yes, but I wouldn't even be certain without calculating even further ahead. Well, I mean, I'm like 80 to 90% confident, and it's hard to calculate further than that from this position here. So you have to at some point rely on your evaluation ability. You can't calculate everything forever. So from this position, if you calculate through all the captures, that's about as far as anyone under 2600 would probably calculate. Or maybe under 2500. Let's say any non-GM is not going to calculate much further than that. The other thing is, like, stronger players are also better at evaluating, so they often calculate less far than weaker players because they can just evaluate the situation and not need to calculate further. So it's not clear, but anyway, in general, if you can calculate through all the captures, let's just say that's very, very good. And then there's the question of how accurately do we evaluate and visualize other order, right? Visualize, are we seeing the position accurately at the end of our calculation? And then are we evaluating the position accurately? So those are two more skills that come in that are separate from seeing all the different orders of captures. But yeah, I think, Great Wolf, that you solved this puzzle perfectly. And one variation we didn't mention at the beginning, we looked at rook takes e4 and bishop takes e6 here, but this is one extra branch that is in the position, and then bishop b4 attacking the queen and rook with an advantage for black. Okay, so if you saw all the captures, that's what you need to do. In the starting position, you can consider playing knight takes e4, bishop takes g4 and f5. 3 candidate moves for your first move as black. And the correct one is knight e4, and then there's 3 candidate moves for white that you should consider. Pawn takes e4, rook takes e4, bishop takes e6. So the number of possibilities is exploding pretty quickly there already, right? In just one move or so. Oh, Das, you'd pointed out the pawn takes e4, bishop b4. Good, very good. You considered the other two. Okay, good. So you can see where you're at based on everything that everyone else is saying, right? We can each see what did other people see, you know, and at what level, etc. So the first start is just seeing all the possible moves on the first one or two moves, and then some of the variations go a couple moves deeper with captures and sort of counting up how many pieces have been captured and did we win or lose a pawn, etc. Yeah. So if you know that, that's already very, very useful, Das, because you can work specifically on that, on predicting all your opponent's possibilities on the very first move. And that tells you to stop looking, you know, 3 or 4 moves down the line, but to concentrate more effort on the very first move, right? Of what are all the possible options when I capture my opponent's piece? It's going to be all moves that are worth at least a piece, right? So it could be recaptures, but it can also be moves that capture something different or that attack a queen or a king or maybe even a rook. So yeah. So, okay. Good puzzle. Thank you, Great Wolf. Now we're going to grab a game from DOS Debug. Whoops. Hang on. Share and export. Yes, that's what I want. All right, here we are, folks. That's right, Great Wolf. This puzzle here is not about winning a decisive amount of material. You do win 1 pawn for black from being down a pawn. So it's basically a single pawn winning puzzle. That's the main point of it. With the side point that you need to be decent at evaluating, or you don't need to be decent. The side point is whether or not you can evaluate the position after winning a pawn, since you start down a pawn, right? So can you recognize that you have an advantage once you win back your pawn? Is that good enough to be worth trading off a bunch of pieces in a position where you don't necessarily want to trade, right? Actually, shoot, I wanted to show you guys one other line that wasn't good. All right, I'll go back even though it's annoying. It's gone. Okay, well, let me flash the actual position for a second, even though it's on a lead chess thing. I'm just so tired of setting up positions. Okay, so real quick, this position here, if you can see it, whoops. Okay, so just real quick, I want to show you one line that wouldn't have been good for black, which would be f5, attacking 2 pieces. Oh, it won't even let me show you. I know it's not the solution. Jesus. Ugh, this is pénible as well. Do I like this puzzle? Sure, but I don't want to train. I don't want to load the next position. Ah! Jesus, Lee Chess, you suck too. Ugh. Once you solve a puzzle, you can't even play out some variations on the puzzle. It immediately loads another one automatically. I wasn't even trying to solve puzzles. God. Well, it certainly didn't let me. That was really annoying. Okay, we're going to set up a position. Okay, it's something like this. And here's what I want to show you about f5 being wrong. Because f5 attacks 2 pieces, which is nice, right? But this move doesn't work because first white takes here. Now if you take the bishop, white's going to have knight takes e6 attacking your queen. And actually we're going to lose a pawn as black here instead of, whoops! Oh god. I don't have like a proper mouse either. Oh, so pénible. Okay, look, f5, knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes, rook takes. This loses another pawn for black. So now we're down 2 pawns for nothing. So after knight c5, we have to take back like this. Now, the bishop can save itself. So obviously, black didn't win any material here. White's not going to lose material. But the question is, you know, this trades less pieces. Might this be a better option for black, right? If white's bishop came here and we played here and the bishop came back here, this option here might be even better than winning a pawn potentially, right? Can you imagine that someone might evaluate this position as being super good for black despite still being down a pawn? Right? Maybe with the move f4, and we're threatening both f3 and e3. But basically, white's still tied up. Their pieces don't have squares, and we're building up pressure, right? So something like this could be very good for black, even remaining down a pawn. Now, when you're in a position like this, and we look at a variation like knight e4, we have to be able to evaluate, you know, yes, we win back our pawn. Let's say like this, right? We win back our pawn, but do we have an advantage after we win back our pawn versus I traded less pieces with f5, right? And in my variation here, with bishop takes, here, 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 you know, maybe black's completely winning while remaining down a pawn, right? So, but the reason that this variation here is not correct for black, this f5, is that white has the move bishop h5, hitting the rook. That one tempo move from the bishop, instead of having to retreat to e2 or f3, it gets into some slightly weak squares. This rook has to waste a move moving, right? Rook e7 or rook f8. Either way, it discoordinates the rooks defending each other and pressuring white down the middle of the board. And it gives black, and it gives time to play either like bishop e3, trying to trade bishops, or to move the queen off of this file so that e4 is not as strong, with like queen f3. My guess would be develop a piece and offer another trade. And now we see that black didn't get more advantage out of this f5 variation. You see what I mean? So that's why it's important before going for a bunch of trades, you have to evaluate, is that position actually better than the position you have before? If you just keep your space advantage with f5, you just play to pressure in the center. Okay, that's the point I wanted to make, right? Just because knight e4 wins a pawn, it's not automatic to go for it in this kind of a position, because it's not winning a rook or winning a queen, right? As Great Wolf said, it's only winning a pawn. So in that kind of course, winning a pawn is an appropriate tactical operation, but you need to evaluate, because the pawn isn't so much that you don't need to think about the position. You can just say, okay, it wins a pawn, I'm sure things will work out, right? We have to do more precise evaluation work on a puzzle of this kind than on a puzzle where you win a queen. You don't sit there scratching your head like, what's the evaluation at the end when you calculate a way to win a queen in a puzzle, right? You just sort of say, okay, I've got the queen, move on. Okay, so now let's look at a game. Hopefully that made sense and was worth the extra effort. So we've got a Berlin defense here going into the main endgame. H3, bishop d7, g4 early. G4 this early is kind of risky. because basically black can hit your structure with h5 and white doesn't have good control of the light squares. So you really have to have a follow-up here if you are alu balu. Knight g5. Well, at least it's a follow-up. Makes room for f3 to defend the pawn structure. What the heck? That's not a move you ever see white play in this opening. Like ever. And why not? Well, it doesn't develop the pieces. It doesn't attack on the side of the board where white's stronger. Normally white tries to attack like with the E and F pawns in the area where white has a pawn majority. And I use the word attack kind of broadly here, you know, a positional attack or an expansion or a strengthening of the position. Why would c4 make sense, DOS Debug? I've never seen anyone play c4 in the Berlin endgame for white, really. h5, yeah. Yeah, c4 stops knight d5. But this rook is far from being able to go to f4 at the moment. This pawn would have to be all the way at f5. And then when black plays h5, I mean, we wouldn't even defend, we'd just play e6. If this pawn ever gets to f5, white's already in great shape, pretty much, for sure. Yeah, but with a white pawn on f4, you can't play rook f4, DOS Debug. Also, the bishop on d7 is attacking g4, so the pawn would just be dead already. But it's completely indefensible. The only way to defend the pawn in this position for white is to play f3. That's the only way, is to try and really, really hold this one light square. Very hard to do against an unopposed light squared bishop. Since white has no light squared bishop, very, very hard to defend. So it would have to be pawn f3. So knight d5 does, I mean, it's a possible move, but at the moment it's not particularly pressing. And the move knight c3 could be played against it as well. That would be a normal move in this position. This would be f3, f4 if you're not losing to h5, but you probably are. Rook e1, so you could answer h5 with e6, maybe. But this move's completely not what white's supposed to be doing. Whoa, what is going on? Holy cannoli. That was very complicated. Oh, now the queenside pawn. Nice. One tiny thing, DOS Debug. In a position like this, you might want to play a5. So the pawn on a4 can't move. Then bring your knight to c5. Or if you're going to do this whole thing, then you want to play like b5 to try and win this pawn for free. But then you're very weak on these squares on the c file with b5. So I think like a very, very logical technique is a5 in this position here. Yeah, but also, I mean, you're right to see goes. b5, it's kind of loose and weird. It's not how the pieces normally go. It might work, but a5 here is much more logical, right? Then you bring the knight to c5 and tie white down pretty badly. You should probably be, I don't know. You're close to winning. Did you win in the end? Let me just see. Two double isolated pawns. Very weird situation. I guess it was still a battle. Sick. Okay. Okay. Well, now that I mention a5, does it seem like a move to potentially get an advantage for black? Holding your pawn structure together nicely. Yeah, you did. You tried really hard to push for the win. Props to you. Good effort. Nice hustle. You chased every loose ball. Oh, let me fix this thing here now. Yeah. Okay. All right. What stands out to me in this game, DOS Debug, is I think the tactical phase that comes like 2 or 3 moves after this is a little bit iffy for both you and your opponent. So I think the most useful thing to go over in this game here would be the sort of 4 or 5 moves after here where it gets really tactical. So you go bishop d4, which is a forcing move. You're attacking e5 and forcing your opponent to play f4. Now, it could have just been a positional thing, like f4 to block their own bishop, and then maybe you want to play bishop takes knight on c3 and give them a weird bad pawn structure and keep going. But no, your plan was to continue to attack their structure. So you're trying to loosen these pawns. And now, I'm guessing here, DOS, but I'm guessing that you wanted to play rook a to h8 and then try to maybe even checkmate white's king, but certainly play like rook h3, rook h2, rook 8 to h3, maybe knight into h4 or somewhere, and really chase this king. So white plays f5 before you can play rook h8 to try to avoid that attack. And yeah, now it's complicated because your knight's attacked and the knight's defending the rook. Okay, so let me ask you one thing. When you played king f7, did you see that white could play f5? Was this on your radar as a candidate move for the opponent? Or was it a surprise for you when white played f5? You did see it. Okay. And how much had you planned against this move f5? Only after playing. Okay. Okay. So that doesn't really help you play good moves so much. It shows us that you could find the move on your own because you saw it before your opponent put it on the board. But it does show that when you're playing your move, you're not yet considering that when you played king f7, you didn't yet have a plan against f5. You weren't really noticing all your opponent's possible moves when you played this, right? But this is very, very critical because, I mean, white needs to do something before rook h8 in general. So when you're playing king f7, you know, what moves should you be looking at when playing king f7? Maybe bishop e3 developing, f5 attacking the knight, knight e4, headed to g5, check, to cover the king a little bit. There are some tricky tactics here, yeah. That's why we're looking at this. Okay. So, yeah, so if you're going to play king f7, I feel like you should have looked at f5, knight e4, bishop e3. Those would probably be the moves I would consider as black before playing king f7. You were afraid of knight e4. Okay, so you'd seen at least one of those moves was part of your planning and thinking. After you play king f7. So as soon as you play king f7, DOS, suddenly you start seeing moves for your opponent? Does it often work like that? You play a move and then suddenly you start seeing moves for the opponent? That's very interesting, huh? But not before you move. Huh. So it could be a visualization thing. It could be that you don't visualize the position after king f7 that well until you've actually played it. And once you've played king f7, then suddenly you see the board correctly. Another possibility is that it's about sort of switching mental directions. Like when it's your turn, you look for moves for you. And then when it's your opponent's turn, suddenly your brain starts looking at moves for the person whose turn it is. But that's definitely seeming like the #1 thing that you should work on is predicting your opponent's moves. Yeah, I am a chess doctor. I've been doing this for a while. And my little special ability, so to speak, is being able to figure out how different people think about chess. Often just from seeing one game or even less than one game, but just a part of a game even. So what I would suggest for you, DOS Debug, I'm coming with a little exercise for you, okay? My exercise for you is every now and then play a chess game where you're actually playing a secret mini game instead of the chess game. So, I mean, you sit down, you set up the pieces like your opponent, you start moving pieces like normal. But normally in a chess game, what you're trying to do is like find the best moves and win the game, right? But you're going to be playing a different game while you play chess with your opponent. Instead, what you're going to be playing is predict the opponent's move. That's it. And you get multiple chances. So here's how it works. You're not going to think too hard about what you want to play. Okay? Like basically if your instinct is king f7, you say, fine, I'm going to play king f7. We don't need to work too hard on what your best move is, okay, DOS? You're not necessarily trying to win this game. We don't care if you like checkmate or get checkmated. We care if you win the mini game that you're going for, okay? So your instinct is king f7. You decide you're going to play king f7, but don't play it yet because now is when you have to play your actual game. Once you've picked that your move is king f7, you're going to try and predict your opponent's move. Now, this game would be extremely difficult if you only had one guess, right? Like you said, I predict knight e4, and then you play king f7 and your opponent plays bishop e3, right? Or you play king f7 and your opponent plays f5. You get to predict as many moves as you want, DOS, so you've got a really good chance of predicting their move correctly. The other is too hard. You have to totally get into your opponent's mind, and even a grandmaster can't predict every move the opponent's going to play. So you don't need to guess one move and have them play that one move. You can guess as many moves as you want, and they have to play one of those moves. So you can say, if I play king f7, they're going to play bishop d2 or bishop e3 or knight e4 or rook d1 or f5. You can make 5 guesses if you want. If they play any one of those 5 moves, you get a point, right? So let's say here you think of king f7 and you think of knight e4, bishop e3. You play king f7, they play f5, 0 points. But now you say, well, my instinct is to take on e5 with the bishop. And you say, well, what moves are they going to play when I play bishop e5? Well, they're either going to take the bishop with their rook, or they're going to play king to f3 or king to g2. And you play this and they take. There's 1 point for you. Right? And now you think, I want to play rook g4. What move is white going to play? Well, they're going to play king takes g4 or king f3 or king h3. Okay, you got a point. They played one of those 3 moves. Are you with me on how the mini game goes? This position here, you're thinking of playing king b6 to come forward and defend the pawn and knight, and you think my opponent might play rook to g8, they might play rook g1, they might play rook g2, they might play rook g5. You're allowed to think of as many moves as you want. Yeah? Yeah, it's not necessarily good exercise for anyone, but it's the right exercise for you, right? So everybody has, you know, 1 or 2 things that would be the most useful for them to work on or do next, and that is the one for you. Right? So this is going to be a good exercise for you. All right, now we've already figured out your exercise. Honestly, we don't even need to look at your game, right? Because you already know what to go do to work on your chess, but we're going to look at this interesting position for a moment anyway. Yeah, what's the question? Nothing. You just don't get a point on that move. And you just keep doing the exercise a few times, you know, and see if you improve. Right? You can score yourself as you're going if you want. I'm not yet set up here, but normally when I'm doing chess DOS debug, I've got like paper and pen with me. Good night, Scotty. Hope you get enough sleep and wake up without a terrible headache tomorrow. So one thing you could do, DOS, is you can have a piece of paper and with your pen, and you just score yourself as you go. And you might see at the end like, oh, it was a 30-move game and I scored 21 points. And then, you know, you would do it again and you play another game. You'd be like, oh, it was 50 moves and I scored 38 points. And you just do it a few times and try and see how many points you can get. You know, see if you can improve at seeing your opponent's moves. And then the next step will be, you know, you'll play normal chess where you're trying to win and you're trying to think of your own moves. And you'll see if you've improved at guessing and predicting the opponent's moves. Right? So you'll have to do this, you know, you probably have to do this exercise at least 5 times. I would say somewhere between 5 and 10 times. And then you'll start seeing results already. It's not that much, honestly, right? 5 to 10 games where instead of trying to win, you do this exercise. And then you'll play some more normal games and you'll see if you've improved at seeing your opponent's moves. You probably will have. But if you feel there's still work to do, you can do the exercise more times, right? Like there's no reason you have to stop at 10 times. But you can judge if you feel like it's improved tremendously and you don't necessarily need to keep doing it, then you can stop it there. Yeah, you're totally welcome. Yeah, 1800. Okay, so we're going to calculate this for a minute or two. And Olivia, I've already played with you yesterday, so I can already tell you something to work on if you want something to work on. So let's just finish on DOS's session if you're around in 10 to 15 minutes, I can give you some advice from yesterday if you want. Okay, so there's a few interesting options here, right? There's several different little tactical things hanging around in this position right now. So one thing we've got is this connection of the knight to the g4 and c4 squares. And that is a very unusual little tactical pattern, but Das noticed it and used that to get 3 pawns for the piece that black seems to be losing, right? Like after f5, it looks like you're going to lose a piece. But if you get 3 pawns for your piece in the endgame, you didn't do that badly, right? You know, 3 pawns for a piece in an endgame, you're rarely gonna lose. That's a pretty good haul. But there's a couple other patterns here as well. You didn't even feel a piece down. Okay, so you weren't even particularly worried. There's a couple other interesting patterns. If your knight moves and the opponent plays king takes h4, you might have bishop f2 check, winning your rook back. So your rook might not even be hanging. Like you could potentially play knight f8 as a candidate move, right? Knight h8, knight f8, knight e7. All of these moves might be candidate moves. They're weird moves, right? I mean, this is hilarious. Your opponent's like winning a rook and we're playing knight h8. Obviously, that's the worst move. I mean, you don't need to calculate really far to see that that's the worst move. But in theory, this could be on your candidate move list. If that were the only square available to your knight, it probably wouldn't lose your rook. Right? Like, what the heck? How is that? How could my pieces all be hanging and I play knight h8? Okay, so that's one pattern, is we've got bishop f2. Now, the second pattern that you have is that you have potentially knight f3 to recover your piece, which is why I think Gulko is suggesting maybe putting the knight on e5. So Gulko is saying, can we look at pawn takes, knight e5, and then king here. Honestly, I don't know if Gulko intends knight f3 or bishop f2, but there's both patterns. There's both patterns, potentially, to recover the material. So now it's like, wait a minute, we've got a lot of candidate moves here after f5, right? In theory, you could take the pawn on f5 or move your knight to any square you want, or play bishop e5 like you did. Yeah. Yeah. E5 looks like the best square for the knight of all the possible squares, right? Like e5 looks a lot better than h8, right? Maybe even better than knight e7, the second best looking square. But the question is going to be, if you play knight e5 in some position, the question is going to be, instead of taking the rook, can your opponent disrupt your minor pieces and then hope to still capture your rook afterwards, right? So that's the danger here, and we can see that if we take it and white takes, we don't have enough for the piece in this variation, right? There's not going to be enough pieces or attackers or whatever, right? So in this position here, Gulko fans saying we could go rook 8, h8, and attack the king with these pieces, and white has to spend a tempo saving the rook. And maybe we've got a checkmating attack in this position. For example, rook e4, trying to counter the pieces and trade, rook check, king here, rook check, king here, checkmate. It's possible, right? Okay, now my instincts tell me that white's gonna have a defense to this, but I don't know for sure. So let's have a look. Oh, a tempo, sorry. A tempo is, basically it means like a piece of time in chess. It's like one move. And often we say, like, if you attack something, that you win a tempo, like one unit of time. because in chess the time is counted in moves instead of in seconds, right? So it's one move of time. If you threaten something that your opponent has to respond to, if they can't respond in a productive way to your threat, then you're basically winning a move of time. If they can play a move that stops your threat and is semi-useful, then maybe you've won a fraction of a tempo or of a time. It's arguable. So, okay, so here, let's try this again. Check, let's go the other way to not get immediately checkmated. Try and run away like this. Still get checkmated by this compact little mating force. So Golkofan's idea of giving checkmate is looking very plausible, right? Very, very plausible. Try and come up this way. Now, I think here there might not be checkmate, but a perpetual check. To me, this feels like it's going to draw by repetition with this rook going back and forth. I don't see a way for black to checkmate. It's an interesting result there. Very, very interesting. Unexpected, very unexpected tactic from this position here. That black would have this, that black would have the knight e5 tactic. Leaving the rook hanging, that white would play this and black would just develop, leaving that rook hanging, and have just enough attack to give a draw by perpetual check. It's a little bit of a surprising result, but I think it's accurate. I think that's accurate. Another thing is, if we take here, we have to consider this move. Check. Just trying to keep an extra pawn on the board for white in some scenario. King here, pawn takes, king takes. Actually, black just defends all their pieces then, and continues attacking the white king. Now black's even threatening rook g4 check, helped by the king. So black's looking in very good position here. I'm going to abandon this idea for white of throwing in e6. Go back to g takes f5. So we looked at knight e5, rook e5. Shall we look at knight e7 as well, a different square for the knight? By the way, based on that last variation, we could also consider just an attacking move like this, right? And seeing if we've got a checkmate or a perpetual here. Again, I'd be shocked if black won, but maybe. Maybe. It doesn't seem like, you know, there should be enough to win. But look, okay, I came up with a cool looking defensive move here, covering h2. But then I realized black has a weird attacking move with the king instead of rook h3. Because if you go rook h3, then the bishop is doing great defensive work. Your attack's almost gone. But look at this. We threatened the piece with our king. And it can't move. Something like rook here, you give check. Force the king here and then take it. Right? And we're just ravaging white's position. Good lord. I think the move king f5 might be winning here, which is a real crazy way to win a chess game. Because the other move for white to defend these squares is knight e2, but that takes away the king's flight square on a light square. Flight square on a light square. And this bishop's covering the dark square. So then we go check here. Here, and it looks like white is just stuck. I guess they can block on g3. guess white can block on g3. And then you go here, and you just win a piece here, probably. If we blocked with the knight, it's even easier. g5, rook f4. Oh, it's check! It's counter check! Oh, God! Oh, God. Oh, I may have bungled it. I may have lost for black. I didn't realize it was counter check. I just thought I was attacking. I saw the move, I just didn't see that it was check, huh? That is an incredible move there, knight g3. Man. Well, I mean, the move's not incredible. The fact that it's check and that it wins in the middle of losing is incredible. I wonder what the best move is for black in that case. Maybe g5 immediately here. Again, trying to disrupt the bishop before it can cover these squares. No, this is check again. Ay, 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 ay. Stop checking me. I'm the one attacking. When I'm attacking, I don't want the opponent checking me. Unfortunately, if our attack is an unconventional attack using our king, we're liable to get checked. The defensive tactics are going to be checks because we're attacking with our king. So normally your king doesn't get checked when you're attacking because normally the king is not part of the attack. Okay, we're going to need to be more careful here. I take this pawn and I win a tempo. Right, Olivia? Maybe? Maybe, because when white moves, now I might lose a tempo, saving my bishop, but I want to go g5 now. Ho ho! Black wins. Rook 2. Pawn takes. Uh-oh, where does this king go? Does this give white enough to get back in the game? Maybe, DOS-Debug. We don't know the result in advance. Honestly, you were sort of maybe losing a piece, so we don't need to win for you. We're just trying to get a decent position. At least equal, maybe an advantage would be a nice bonus. Now f3 would win, except again our king's going to get checked. Ay, ay, ay. And if I give check, white has knight g1. Rook g8, rook g2. Okay, well, we've got two options here for black. One is we go check, here f3, taking away rook g2. And the threat is to go rook g8, and there's just no white piece that can come and defend this knight. Okay, so f3, maybe genius. Maybe genius. Our other option as black in this position is king g4. Right here, getting out of the way of any knight checks. Now we maintain this, so we try to play f3 and win the knight because of the rook being undefended. Also, maybe we can keep attacking with our king. Just kidding, it'll walk into knight g1 check. But, okay, it is fun to keep moving the king forward, right? This looks pretty good for you, DOS-Debug. I'd be surprised if white has any way to get the advantage here. Actually, I like this variation, and then f3 stopping rook g2. Oh, there's rook f2 is the move. Look at this, white saves himself. Because they're going to take on f3 with checks. We don't know if it's winning or not. It's a messy position. I understand, Dostin, when you get into complicated tactical positions, it's kind of like flipping coins whether you win or lose because you don't calculate accurately enough. that it's not necessarily you win if you're winning or you lose if you're losing, but it's kind of like a lot of coin flipping based on whether you or your opponent see a certain tactic or not. Yeah. I don't know. It's honestly, DOS, even for a master, they would have to calculate pretty darn hard here, I think, to figure out what's going on here. Like even this position. You know what's happening. A5 takes here. The knight and king aren't headed this way. We're playing this and this. You'll still draw, even this position. You won't win, but you'll draw. It's a crazy, crazy, crazy situation. By the way, we're like 10 moves into this variation, so it's nothing that anyone would ever actually calculate. But king f5 was a fun move. I wanted to look at knight e7, right? Oh no, that's fine, that's fine. We can stop around here. We've done a lot of work. We've seen that the position's crazy and what your options are, and you know what to work on next. We can look at somebody else's game. There's other people here to talk about. So this was a fascinating moment. And honestly, this position would be a great calculation exercise for the stronger players in the room. To just calculate for 10 minutes what black should do from this position. Who knows? Who knows? Honestly, in 10 minutes, nobody would figure it out. Sorry. But like Gulko fan or I, we could spend 20 minutes calculating in this position. It would be a good exercise for us. And anyone else at that level who happens to be here. All right. Take care, DOS Debug. We'll see you again soon. And yeah, we were looking at 95 bouncing across. And we seemed to get a draw with it. And now we're going to look at some other games. So I've got a game from bouncing across, and I've got a game from poke ice. And Olivia, if you're here, we played 4 games yesterday, and I could give you a short consultation if you wanted, since I've already looked at your games. I'm going to start looking for bouncing across his game. Do it here. Okay. This is what I have as the final position. Is this the end bouncing across, or was there more to it? Okay. Okay, you were black in this game, and it looks like you've got an extra queen at the end, so you won this game. The purpose is not necessarily a grilling But generally speaking, for anyone who's never seen the Postmortem, the purpose of the Postmortem show in general is for me to be able to give somebody a little bit of feedback on their chess. You know, maybe something they can improve on or answer some question that they might have about a game. You sent a game by email? Okay, cool. Thanks, Jordan. A short game is fine. The most important thing about any game that you choose to send generally is that there be some question you have about it. Like if you feel like you understand everything about the game, then like what else am I going to tell you about it, right? So normally something where you have some question. Sometimes when we look at somebody's game, we only look at one move of the game. There's just one move where they weren't sure which decision to make, and that's all we look at. It's just that one move and discuss that one decision. Okay, so your opponent tries to trap your rook. You trap their queen. With this complicated position. Position is super weird right here. I mean, sort of you want a queen, but I don't know who's winning or losing. Sick from white. I mean, if you take, you might even lose to those two passed pawns. That's insane. You're up a queen and okay, but you stop the pawn breakthrough there. They try to hold, but now you just take it all apart, and that's why they resigned. Okay, all their hopes are gone. They had nowhere else to go with this piece now. Okay, so you want to know if this is hope chess or sound chess, huh? Exactly, Gulko fan, that's what I was thinking of, but I don't know if that's relevant for bouncing across, so we'll see if we get to that at any point, even though it's a cool moment. Okay, so should you play g5 or should you play knight g8? When you play g5, maybe they'll blunder the queen. What move would white play if they wanted to not blunder their queen here? What's the right move for white here? Okay, your fear was that white would see the queen's in danger and take, making a place for this to escape. Now you would probably take here, here, and go knight g8, and get a position like this. Okay. So your g5 move forces them to sacrifice a piece for two pawns. It's obviously a plausible sacrifice. Hard to know if, you know, you're winning or losing without more insight and calculation and stuff. Because the h pawn is very strong, passed pawn in the position, and black can't castle yet here. Maybe bishop g5 could have been interesting too, instead of knight takes, sure. Sure, you could go bishop takes. Again, they can go knight g8, right? You come here. Here, here, and then maybe overwork the rook. Actually, that seems pretty strong. Let's see, what are you supposed to do about that? I guess you sack it, but then the h-pawn's also queening, right? Like they may or may not even take it. Hey, thanks for the raid. Let's Chess Live. Let's do a shout out to you. How's everybody doing? Welcome to the Postmortem and to the Chess Dojo. Let's Chess Live. Feel free to tell folks in our channel about your channel and what you're doing, and then there's a link there where they can follow you if they're interested. To everybody joining us right now, the Postmortem is a show where I look at viewers' games and then give them some advice or feedback based on those games. We do a lot of different shows here on Chess Dojo, but that's what we're doing today. We're looking at this game here from Bouncing Across, and basically we're talking about this situation here. Bouncing Across was considering playing knight to g8 or g5, and probably played g5 because they thought it gives white a chance to blunder the queen, which white then did. Got the queen trapped. Versus playing this based on which move they think is the better move. Two different ways to play your moves, right? What do you think is best, or what do you think gives the opponent the best chance to make some kind of blunder or lose in some way that you can see? So a little bit of like a hope chess feeling. So what we're trying to evaluate here is, was g5 potentially a blunder? Was it too big a risk that Bouncing Across took here? And the first thing we looked at here looked quite scary for black. So we're going to get into that a little bit more. Zura, yeah, cool. And today you were looking at Zurich 1953. That's great. Zurich 1953, great book. And yeah, that sounds like great content. So folks, you hear that, what they're doing over on Let's Chess Live. So consider giving them a follow if you're interested. Okay, so let's see if we can answer this question for Bouncing Across. So you risk / allowed. Yeah, I've moved to France for a year. Yeah, big change for me. Bishop g5. This did seem very, very risky. If here, and the rook's basically trapped. I keep wondering if you've got enough of a counterattack to forget about this stuff, but you don't really. The threats to the white king take a while to come here for black. There's not a counterattack where we can say, oh, whatever, let's give up the rook. Because after we give up the rook, the h-pawn's also going to queen. And black's attack is just not that fast, actually. So you'd be back to playing knight g8, transposing to the variation we already saw. Here we had rook g7, h6 was our line. Maybe now takes. Rook h8's a big threat, so we're going to have to castle. Knight f7. So black hasn't lost, a rook or a knight or anything like that. But they've given up 2 pawns. And white's looking pretty strong here. Black needs to do some real destruction of white here to get back into the game. If you go rook f8, there's knight d6 check, winning the rook. I don't feel like we've got time to move the rook somewhere, so I'm going to sack and exchange. The problem is, what am I doing next? I can't play d takes c3, I can't play d3, I can't really threaten anything for black. So white could take the exchange and just win. Okay, if I save the rook, white probably plays like g3 or something. don't know. I mean, black's not completely dead. Not completely dead. White is up 1 pawn. White is up 1 pawn. The game's not over, but it's got to be an advantage for white. We've got, you know, in white's favor, you've got the white bishop's much better than the black bishop. The G pawn is a pretty decent pass pawn at some point. White's got the H file. It's just better for white. So this kind of thing here would definitely be a pretty big risk for bouncing across. It's less completely losing than if white had the H pawn, right? So at least I got rid of white's H pawn, so I didn't lose, but it wasn't good enough. All right, thank you so much. Have a good night, and yeah, working till 4 a.m. folks. Zura is working hard, so let's appreciate that. Overall, this is looking very, very risky bouncing across. Do we have any more clever idea for black than this? Because right now it's looking like this was too risky. Is the final position so bad? No. It's within the margin of you know, positions that you can play. You know, maybe you're -1 or 2 or 1.5 or something like that, right? It's within the margin of something where you definitely have practical chances against your opponents who are not grandmasters. But maybe in a GM versus GM game, maybe it's on the borderline of lost. Yeah. So, I mean, as far as whether or not you were taking a risk by playing G5, maybe you were, because bishop takes G5 looks very strong. Now, the other move you were considering, let's see if it's any better, right? It was knight G8, queen F4, and here you would probably play G5 in this position, right? And then I think queen E3 actually makes sense for white here, because I want to bring this knight to G4, so I don't want to put my queen there. White's going to be mildly better. We can maybe improve this knight to F5 quickly. Does C4 make sense? Maybe, or just knight back here, coming here as soon as we can. If white plays bishop D3, you'll play C4 later. Meanwhile, you're maybe threatening to take on D4, so white has to worry about that as well here. You're probably doing okay. I mean, white probably has like an edge, but you're probably doing okay. I suppose we should also look even at this crazy sack here. And the point is to do this and try and trap this piece, right? So this could come here and still we threaten it. Yikes. I agree, Golko fan. The position where I retreated for white here, this is better for black than the bishop takes G5 line, right? So if it were just between these bouncing across, we would say, yeah, you made a mistake by playing your G5 move and allowing white's sacrifice, because here you still got a much sounder position. Yeah, this position, if white has an advantage, it's like a small, normal kind of advantage, long game up ahead, right? The other position, you're truly down a pawn, and white's position's pretty good. You know, that other position was like truly bad. Like this one here, you know, strong players could look at it and argue about the evaluation. Oh, you think black has the advantage? Well, I mean, G4 would stop knight F5. I don't know. There's all kinds of moves possible. White could maybe take on c5. Sometimes that can be a decent move at this point. But yeah, I mean, you've got lots of options. White's got lots of options. Again, the queen could go here, or there's this knight g5 sack we have to look at briefly as well. You want to start with c4 instead of knight g7. Sure, and you might be right that that might be preferable. Just avoid this kind of a thing. Make sure not to allow bishop d3 and spend another move bringing the knight here. But now I'll twirl my knight one move faster, right? Because you did spend a tempo on it. So now I come here. Now you don't want me to check you, so you get castled. Knight f6. Now you can throw knight f5. But whatever, my pawn's not threatened because you played c4, right? So the game just kind of goes on. A standard plan for white here is going to be something like f4. Right? I can play g4 first, so your knight goes back and play f4. It's just a standard position. Like, there will be people who like black's position and people who like white's position. The king on d1 is not that big a deal. I mean, where would the king rather be? These French positions where the center's all locked up are a little bit weird as far as where the kings want to be. White generally plays for a positional advantage that sort of doesn't depend at all on where their king is, and the king can be a little loose depending how the game goes at various points. But here white's trying to prove that they've got an advantage over on the king side. Well, it's a plausible thing to claim as white. In a sense, playing knight f5, you just gave me time to get everything out of the way to play f4. I don't know. So, from everything I'm looking at here bouncing across, I would say the position's super complicated. The g5 move definitely entailed a risk, and knight g8 first is less clear. But still, I mean, I don't think we've really found a clear move here for black, have we? Maybe if I go this way instead of the other way, then the rook can go hide over here. Maybe this is black's defense. I was thinking I'd keep an extra knight on the king side to help me, but maybe that knight was just trapping my own rook. So we could try this way. I mean, as long as you can survive this variation here, then you can definitely say this was the right way to go for black. Or did I have rook g8? Did I just blunder? c4 maybe before this gets any further out of hand. c4 and cd4 is like such a huge and difficult choice to make in all these positions. Oh man, it's complicated. It is complicated. But I'll tell you what, bouncing across. I mean, if I calculate for 20 minutes and go 10 moves deep moving pieces, you know, it's not going to be realistic for anything you can figure out during a game. I mean, looking at it from that perspective, g5, bishop g5, it seems like you're giving white a clear option to maybe come out ahead, whereas knight g8, you're not. So I feel like you did let the hope chess color influence your decision too much. I feel like you played a little bit towards the hope and the fear at the same time, right? Because you played g5 and you're like fearing white's going to play bishop takes g5 with good reason, it seems. So bishop d3, surely he'll play that. Yeah, I would say that's a bad thought. I think you know, obviously that's going to put a ceiling on how far you can progress in your chess, right? If it's baseline, surely he'll play that. Even if you're right and you beat that player, you know, your rating will go up 20 points and then 20 points. And at some point you'll be playing against somebody who doesn't play that, right? So you're definitely putting like a hard limit on how far you can get if that's how you're selecting the moves, right? So yeah, I would say play, generally speaking, play what you think is the best move. You know, when should one resort to hope chess or, you know, trappy kind of ideas? Basically, once your position's kind of bad anyway, right? So if you think your position is bad here, you know, then you can take your shot. Then you can set a devious trap where if white tries to kill you, you know, you kill them. But in general, to my mind, hope chess is low percentage chess, so it's something to use once you're already in a low percentage situation. And then it can give you chances to save a bad position for sure. You know, it can be very good to play trappy things when you're in a bad position. But if your position is still reasonable, I wouldn't resort to hoping. Yeah, and again, we've got more French like yesterday. A good hope chess, we can say, because it is hard to see a backward move coming. In general, a lot of backward moves are hard to see coming, right? A lot of weird retreating moves that can be surprises. Okay. So Elise, I've moved for 1 year to France. And it is 11:38 for me. We're approaching my lunch break. Sure, and overall you played it well bouncing across. I mean, you showed like a good feel for the opening. Overall, this game looks good, right? It's just you asked me about one very interesting key moment, which is a great thing to ask about. And you've got your answer. I agree with your concern that this might have been hope chess versus the best chess. This position here is just so funny and interesting, folks. I want to point out a move that Gulko fan also noticed, which was that in this position, White's best move would have been bishop g8, preventing castle's queenside followed by rook h8. And in the game, White played knight h2, Black castled, and then there was no way to save this bishop. White had a very, very clever idea in mind with bishop g6, which almost wins the game, but bouncing across knew not to take it and just defended the f7 point and then won within another 1 or 2 moves. So the best move for White here would almost certainly have been bishop g8. And if you castle, then bishop takes f7 and White's in the game. I don't even know if White's worse once they do this. It's really an interesting position. You know, because White's got a rook and a good bishop against a queen. The position's complicated and weird. This knight can do a maneuver to g4 at some point potentially to show White's advantage on the king side. It could be really interesting, right? So, you know, if Black really wants to hold on to this pawn, they could try king f8, but then it's very hard to get the rook on the other side of the king. Very, very weirdly hard to do it. Where did your rook go? White took it while you were taking their queen. It was a rook and a knight for a queen, right? Or since White has a bishop pair, it ends up being, you know, a bishop pair. So, I mean, it's a material balance that in general is favorable for Black, but the position is so weird and complicated that we're not totally sure. Here, White's bishop is trapped and can't really get out of the way, but Black doesn't yet have an obvious way to win it. So this would be like a weird standoff situation as well. I don't know if it would be good or bad. But anyway, clearly bishop g8 is the best chance for White. And I would say it's important to find moves like this because the way White played, they lost the game like 100%. Like after knight h2, Black was going to win this game 100% no matter what. And pretty quickly, right? It's not, they don't have to find 50 good moves. Already here, White's resigning, right? Just completely lost. Whereas if you play bishop g8 in this position, even if, I don't know, a computer might say +5 and a human grandmaster might say Black's winning +2. But, I mean, this feels like a position where, there's a lot left to play and a lot of room for both players to have to find a good number of good moves. Like maybe black's best plan here is queen a5 to d8. No, knight g4 comes in time to defend this pawn. I mean, it would be great if black could win this pawn. Anyway, what I'm saying is, when I look at this position, I couldn't necessarily win it in bullet. Like just obvious, intuitive moves are not necessarily going to be enough to win this position. It might really require some cleverness. Okay, also an interesting idea from bouncing across. Bishop g6 might be really interesting here. Again, if black takes, they probably lose to these pawns. I mean, we can't be sure. Maybe black's got a lot of material to trade for the pawns. Maybe black wins. Maybe they draw. Maybe they lose. But this bishop's also preventing black from castling queenside. So that could be a candidate move as well. But white needed to find one of those bishop moves. And it's very valuable because you keep the game going. You keep, maybe a 40% chance versus a 0% chance. It makes a big difference. Okay. I'm going to take a very, very quick look at Pokeis's game before I run off to lunch like a real French person. Okay, Pokeis is going to be white here in this game. Nice. Oh, brutal. Oof. I don't know. Okay, hard to break through. Black trades queens, which if anything might help white. I mean, in general, you want to do nothing if you're trying to defend. Don't unnecessarily do anything. At least black's always avoiding the bishop trade, which would allow white to win the game. It's going to be long. Oh! Look at that. Black did it themselves. If they lose this game, then for sure they chose to lose the game. Ooh. I think white should bring the king to b7, then play knight b6 check to get more territory for the king. But now the knight retreated. Now the king advances. Good. Check. Yep. King gets c6. Knight takes e5 is winning here. The king and pawn ending is already winning. White goes here. I guess the plan is king c7, knight c6 perhaps, and then the king comes into d7. So black plays sort of a desperation-y move. Knight e5, king e5, king d7, king d4, king d6, king c4, king e5, king b5, d6, c4, d7. Okay, so white's still winning with knight takes e5. The king and pawn ending is still winning. Goes for it. Yep, and then just a waiting move. Yeah, perfect. Okay. All right, so black did it to themselves, first of all. They did it to themselves by trading light square bishops. This move here. Lost the game. The game had been blocked up for a long time with no progress from either player. Black traded queens, which was bad, and then they traded light square bishops, which was absolutely terminal. And then white's completely winning, and Pokeis did a good job of winning it. But let's, instead of talking about black's difficulties, let's talk about Pokeis's difficulties since it's their game. So at some point they were up a pawn, and then they couldn't figure out how to make much progress, and they ended up sacking their extra pawn back here. So let's look at this. So first of all, Pokeis, I think that letting the opponent trade on f3 and doubling your pawns makes it much harder to win this game. So if I were you, I would prefer to avoid that trade on f3. I know their knight's really good, so you don't want to like run away and say that knight wins the battle. So maybe trade right here. I know you probably are reluctant because it slightly improves this piece, but it's still a bad piece, right? You still have an extra pawn plus a bad bishop to play against. It's probably enough to win the game. So your position's probably good enough to be winning here. If you have a sufficient advantage to win, which I think you do, then that is good enough. That seems to me the most obvious solution. The other solution is to move this knight away before maneuvering this and just concede this and work around it. To me, that's a little bit more risky because you're really backing off, but black's not very active, so I suppose you could do that as well. Like you could go knight here, and if black's doing nothing, you know, put the knight here. I mean, they can always challenge you, and you pretty much have to trade. I mean, you can't just run away forever. Go knight here, bishop here, knight here. Now we'll eventually get the knight here. But now what you're slightly risking is like maybe opposite colored bishops, giving a small hope. We also have to watch out for queen a5 when we trade off a bunch of stuff. So that's not my favorite. My favorite, yeah, is going to be to trade once here and then bring this knight. And if black plays the queen here, maybe we should avoid queen a5 with this move queen d2. Just keep them honest. Maybe this to stop knight here to make things a little bit harder for us. And our king should defend the a pawn, just to have less things that are loose. So, yeah, black could take on e5 with the queen instead of the f pawn. It's possible too. It'll also be a great position for white. Similar. Are you winning 100%? 98% maybe? I mean, you still have to figure out how to break through with the knight, and whenever you go bishop g4, they'll go bishop g6 and stop knight f5, right? So, I mean, they still have hopes. But you do have an extra pawn, so you've got breakthroughs possible. You've got a3, b4 on this side of the board. You could try poking the h-file and see if you can dislodge this bishop and get knight g4 in. Or get your queen to h7 and control this diagonal, then move the bishop out of the way of knight f5. There's a lot of room to do something to try and win. Their bishop's bad and you're up a pawn. I think it's in your favor to probably win. Now, let's consider a queen trade is good for you and a light squared bishop trade is good for you. Trading your knight for their light squared bishop and going into opposite colored bishops is probably your lowest winning % chance. And even that, you would have a chance to win. Maybe 50%. If you play knight g4, bishop g4, bishop g4. You know, maybe white's still 50% to win. Because you're up a pawn and their bishop is worse than yours. Right? And you still have a queen to work with. Then you can't trade queens. You don't want to go into the pure bishop ending. But you can try and outwork them with the queen and bishop. There's stuff to be attempted there. Maybe 50% chance. But it's a huge drop in your chance. Maybe even only 40% chance. Whereas right now I would say you're like 98% to win. So the one trade to avoid really is your knight for the opponent's light squared bishop probably. But a queen trade moves you closer to winning. A light squared bishop trade is game over for sure. Like, once you trade light squared bishops, it's like king and queen against king. Yeah, white doesn't want to play g4 because you're taking away a lot of your options bouncing across. You're taking away knight g4. You're taking away g3, f4. You want to be very, very judicious about pawn moves here. White is already dominating on light squares. The question is how to use that to then win the game. You need to transfer your light square dominance to winning one of these two pawns or starting an attack on the king. Those are the three possible targets here. Or maybe one other possibility is you tie up black's bishops and sort of trap them on bad squares. You could win by really just, yeah, their pieces running out of squares on f7, f8 with your queen on a good square. You want queen d1 because it looks at a4 and h1. Yeah, I agree, that would be nice, but you don't have it. If you want that square, you can play f3. f3 doesn't give up that many options the way g4 does. With f3, you still have the g4 square for your pieces, and you still have the g3, f4 pawn break if you need a pawn break. Now, I know g3, f4 looks terrible here because this bishop comes alive, and then, you know, you could be in trouble even. But that's an ultimate pawn break. I mean, what if every piece got traded and you had a king and pawn ending? If you've played g4, the king and pawn ending's a draw. Do you realize? Imagine the white pawn goes to g4, and then you trade every single piece into a king and pawn ending up a pawn. It's a draw because you've got no way to open the position. And if you put the pawn back on g3, you can play f4 and you just win the king and pawn ending normally with your extra pawn. The way every king and pawn ending should be won with an extra pawn. Okay? So it's a huge deal whether or not you've got a way to ever open the position as the side with the advantage. And even levers that you don't think you want to use positionally, you have to be careful about not using them up in a semi-locked position, right? Not giving them up. You have to keep them available so that you could eventually potentially win the game. So this is, I think, this is one big thing here for poke ice, is that the bullet should have just been swallowed with knight e5. Because now these pawns are more easy to blockade on the dark squares. And I think that's what poke ice eventually runs into, is they don't see a way to make progress. Even with the queen trade, black allowed knight f5 and still white wasn't able to break through completely. And then this pawn got attacked and just sacked, right? So white got, yeah, even with a knight on f5, the pawn structure was so bad, right? This is a result of the trade on f3. And white should not have won this endgame, I don't think, after losing that pawn. I don't know. White was really struggling to win this game. So definitely we shouldn't have made that trade. That said, how can white make progress in this position? I would think you want to go bishop f5. If they trade bishops, you win. If they don't trade bishops, you put your queen on h7. And white's moving back and forth. Okay, let's try my plan. Here, here. Let's just try one sample variation. So here, queen b4, you take, and c takes b is very bad for black structure. It gives us this extra c5 break, and it gives us this pawn to go attack. So, I don't know, black could play a5 like in the game, or wait around with queen d8 or bishop f8. Let's try a5 like in the game. Play queen here. Counterplay. We go and win a bishop. Remember I told you, like, sometimes instead of winning a pawn, we'll just win these pieces. Black can't quite give a perpetual. They lose, because they lose a piece. The other possibility is we come back with the queen and we defend. Now it has to be here to stop this, or h8. I guess it could go to h8. Still get out of the way in time. Can white win? This doesn't quite work. Right? Can't do that. Because we do need to open the position somewhere at some point. Tried bishop e6. It didn't do anything yet after this move. Very hard to win. Very hard to win. I don't really see a win, honestly. I don't see a way to win, which is bad news, because that means we might not be able to trade queens. Yeah. Very hard to win. Okay, so the major thing we see this game is that GF3 made it a million times harder to win. This position here, I mean, maybe we could go queen e1 now, that black left those squares. Queen d8, p4. Queen b6, a3. Now the knight can go through d4, so it can get access to too many outposts at once. The bishop won't be able to cover all of them. Can stretch black's defenses a little bit. Put the knight on d3 and then play for f4. Yeah. We could do that too, yeah. Queen here. Now, if the queen goes back in this direction, we go queen h2. And they can't stop queen h7 because the d6 pawn is hanging. So maybe like king here. I'm afraid black can even play a move like queen h4. Like, I really don't see how we win for white. Cover this. Knight g2. Check. If they trade, it's always lost because we fix our pawn structure. And the king gets here in time to cover all these squares, and white does win the pawn. I guess you're right, Elise. But even still, I mean, this harassing move is going to be annoying too. It's a little bit, even this is going to be a little bit annoying, right? Here, here, here. Complicated. Just a little bit complicated. It might work. It's a little tricky to let that black queen get in. We can avoid obvious perpetuals. I'm not saying it's a complete blunder. We can avoid obvious perpetuals, but it's taking some resources to keep our king defended. So yeah, we could try and improve the king first, or we could not bring the queen up to g3 so soon, right? We could keep her like here. g1, g2. Queen e1 was interesting as well, but I didn't look at queen h2 there, which might have been a better defense. No, this is just not as important as what white's doing, right? Hello. So I think queen e1 might make sense, shifting directions. But okay, I mean, if you can't win the ending after you've doubled the pawns, that's a really bad sign for doubling the pawns, right? It's made the game much harder. I think the idea of bringing the knight to d3 and breaking with a pawn trade here or here might be best. But breaking open dark square diagonals for their bishop before we've traded queens, it's definitely going to be risky. Right? But we can't win with the position this locked up, so we have to use our queen to help us fight for either b4 or f4 pawn breaks. And yeah, I would say white's chances of winning exist, but are not at all guaranteed. All right. Great game, Pokeis. Thanks for sending us that one. I hope our comments were useful for you. I'm going to take my lunch break here. So hope everybody enjoyed it, and I will see you again soon.